This is Chapter 8, Early Childhood Social Emotional Development for Psych 241, um, Developmental Psychology. So let's just review. Early childhood is from 2 to 6. That's the time frame we're talking about here. And again, these are normatives. These are not specific. So if somebody is 6 years old and can't do something, that doesn't mean there's an issue. If someone's 2 years old or is advanced, it just means that they are advanced at that role. Okay, so let's kind of move on from that, and we'll talk more about that as we go along here. So here's some of the learning objectives. Child rearing parenting styles. Many of you got this in 150, so we'll talk about that again. Siblings, birth order, peers. Some of this stuff might make great final project discussions. So birth order attached with parenting styles is an interesting conversation. Then we have some of the emotional development that occurs based on Erikson and some other things. And we have some gender roles that we'll talk about as well. So some of the dimensions of child rearing. So there are several different types of parental situations, and you guys are probably aware of those as you kind of go to people's houses or you become a parent yourself. Warm parents are affectionate towards their children, express feeling openly. This is generally a more well-rounded child comes from this environment, but that doesn't to say others don't allow really successful young people as well. But it does relate to the child's social and emotional well-being. Okay, so there's something to that a little bit. Co-parents, usually that means that parents have their own issues. There's psychological issues. It could be a marriage problem. It could be lots of things going on, but they're not as responsive to the child's feelings and the child's situation. So the child ends up developing coping skills that allow them to kind of get along without their parents, which, as you can imagine, does lead to some problems later in life in terms of trust and other issues, the relationships. Authoritative parents, they're parents that, and some of us have had those, where really strict. Many times it's a physical punishment. This is a go grab your switch and come in, and then it's used on you. These tend to lead to more aggressive children, not always. And there ends up being some issues with this type of environment as well. Now, that's not to say that any of your parents are bad people. As I've said before in other areas, is that you don't come with young people babies don't come with a manual. They don't come with a instruction manual. So parents do the best they can with what they know, and many times these things are I wouldn't say hereditary, but they certainly are environmentally passed on down the path. Also, because we have a strong military presence in our background, we tend to have a little bit more in terms of authoritative parents. This is an environment that a military person is very used to, and so they've been used that as well. And certainly some wonderful young people can come out of those environments as well. Permissive parents, that really want to be their child's best friend. They want to in some cases, other cases they just really don't care. I guess that's maybe a sad way of saying it, but they just kind of let them do what they want to do, and as long as they don't get in trouble or bother them, then it's kind of okay. So it's one of the styles as well. So these are ways that the restrictions are enforced. There's inductive, which is as we go through this world of critical thinking, this tends to be a way that you can become more effective in the critical thinking aspect of it. So teach knowledge that will enable children to generate behavior. So how can they make their own decisions? How can you give them a basic framework and they can decide whether to do something or not do something? And involve reasoning, so they can sit down and say, okay, this is a good thing, this is a bad thing. Maybe go through the Freudian ego, superego aspect of it. Then there's also the power assertive. These are the physical punishment, denial of privileges, threatened withdrawal. These tend to lead to problems later in life for young people. and many of us, maybe as adults, have probably maybe experienced some of that, and we can look back and say, because of that, I may have developed a certain way, especially with withdrawal of love. Is the research kind of shows this is a bigger impact really than some of the physical stuff, and so this is something that I think I would just recommend by what all I've read and research I've looked at is this is probably something that parents really want to avoid. The child always has to feel loved, even though they're being disciplined. Okay, so hopefully that's the case. And here's just a couple of things that kind of a chart that shows it. This would be a good chart to have available when you're taking the quiz, so you can take a look at it, and you can see here's authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and rejecting and negligent. This area again is probably somewhere where the people have their own issues. There might be some issues. There might be some cognitive issues. There may be some behavioral issues that are going on, and these others are all things that are generally one of these two will the research shows can lead to the most productive young person later, and so those are things that parents have to decide as they're growing up, and especially if there's a mother and a father. Sometimes those can be difficult because it can have different styles, and so the children get real confused about what environment they're in. So here's the authoritative. We've talked a little bit about this. Generally, they respect the children. They just don't. Authoritative is, you teach the children how to make decisions based on transmitting of values and standards. They have self-reliance, independent, usually are higher self-esteem, higher levels of activity. They tend to have a better sense of social competence. Their emotional IQ tends to be a little bit higher. So that's the authoritative. Then there's the authoritarian. Authoritarian is the control. Authoritarian parents generally don't communicate really well. There's not a lot of talking involved. There's do this, do that. If you don't do this, do that, then this will happen to you. So sons tend to grow up maybe relatively hostile and defiant. Daughters, low independence and a sense of dominance that's there. So the daughters maybe have relationship issues, and the son may have relationship issues, but they're very different issues. Okay, that come out of the authoritarian parent. And again, these are not always, but this is where the child that's growing up in these environments might tend to go to these areas. Permissive, again, this is just, it's kind of laissez-faire. The parents kind of, they really maybe kind of want to be the best friend of their child, and instead of realizing that they need to be the adult in the child, you can certainly have a warm, caring relationship with them and still be the adult in the room. So, and then you have the neglecting, which is people then tend to have their own issues there, and those are the four styles that we've talked about in the past, and 150 especially. So parenting styles, the impact is what are the characteristics of the child, and so as I said, all these things can vary a little bit, but and also if they get punished, do they know what they've done? It's like when you have a dog or an animal. If you want to reward them, you reward them right when they did the act. If you want to punish them, you want to punish them right when they did the act. It's kind of more difficult with human beings because something will happen 2 days ago and you catch them, and then you want to punish them right now for something happened 2 days ago. That's a little bit more of a challenge. Doesn't mean you don't, but that's a little more of a challenge, and sometimes the connection isn't always made. Okay, so let me see, next one. Parenting styles. So here's the kind of the do's and the don'ts, okay, of child behavior. So good behavior and bad behavior, that's really important. It's hard to do because a good behavior, you're just so pleasing, you just kind of go on, it makes life easy, and you just don't want to, you just don't feel as though you need to make a big deal about it because that's the expectation. But just like a dog or something like that, you need to reward the good behaviors. Same with young children as well. And so here are some of the do's and here are the don'ts. Most of this ties into being authoritative parent, not authoritarian parent. Some of these tie into a little bit about the authoritarian. Okay. Um, okay. So social behaviors. So we have different things, siblings. A lot of it depends on where you sit in that environment. We'll talk about birth order a little bit, but um, as I mentioned before, my family was pretty messed up in terms of a lot of things. Um, I've had I keep forgetting the number, but sort of like 14 people that I would call siblings. Um, I've had halves, brothers and sisters. I've had steps. I've had an adopted. I've had biological, and all of them somewhat fit into this world. And at one time, I've lived with each one of them, and how they fit into the world and how I fit in the world when they were there or not there was a thing. So many of you may not have that complexity, and some of you may have that or more. But as family dynamics change, let's say mom or dad get remarried, they've got some young people that are mixed in with it. That affects your whole environment, and so that is influence that your siblings have on you, and whether you get along with them or don't get along with them, that can be a big part of that as well. So these are some things that conflict can lead to. Okay, and especially this, in conflicts when parents play favorites. Many times parents don't necessarily play favorites on purpose, but they end up rewarding someone who is a good little person, and the other one who's a little bit more rascally doesn't get rewarded. And then all of a sudden it seems like they're playing favorites, and yet the parent thinks that they're just rewarding good behavior. So that's a challenge. Again, there are no instruction manuals with these young people when you become a parent. Okay, and those of you that are parents will hopefully will confirm that. So if another new child comes in, that changes the whole dynamic, especially if you're the only child and then someone else gets born and you were the sole existence of those parents, and all of a sudden this other person is there, and depending on how that happens, if the parents involve you in that raising of that child, holding it, feeding it, you tend to make it yours. Not yours literally, but certain part of your family. If you and being put off and everything's about the new child, then your children can get into some of these kind of things right here. And the anger and naughtiness might be just attention grabbing. It also might mean that their independence and maturity increase, which seems like a good thing, but you may not want that at the age that they're at. Okay, so that's something that just to be conscious of. Birth order, again, this is just some basic ideas. Firstborn, usually a little more highly motivated. They have some different rules on them than others have. Usually get higher standardized test scores. There's greater anxiety, less self-reliant. Many of them, they're the only child for a while, or by nature being the firstborn they are. But a lot of it depends on how soon the other one's born. If it's 6 years later, that's a big difference. If it's 18 months later, that's a difference as well. So, these are all kind of a soft definition of that, but I think you'll find many times in that much of this right here is true about firstborns. Then you've got the later born children. Certainly, did I skip one? No. Okay. So later born children, middle children tend to have a little more issues in terms of where they fit in, who they are. They tend to get away with a little bit more because the parents have learned and or are not focused on things they were with the older child. That, of course, makes the the firstborn a little more anxious or angry because I got in trouble when I did that, and they don't get in trouble when they didn't do it. Maybe the parents have changed, and maybe society has changed, and so I don't. People say, "Well, I'm going to deal with my children the same." I think that's probably not the best thing, as it is that you're going to be fair with each child, and because the world changes as new children come in, and situations change. It could be financially. The first child born usually is a younger couple or younger parents, so therefore financially there's a challenge. Maybe a little bit later there is a little better financial situation. So things do change, but later born children can be, parents are a little more relaxed, those kind of things. Usually more rebellious and liberal than the firstborn, and that that's because some of the parents are a little more relaxed, and so they get away with a little bit more. Um, and so anyway, that's part of that. So again, birth order would be an interesting thing in some of the final projects. Peer relationships. Okay, so these are peers of friends that are outside the family. Um, so by age of 2, children kind of have a favorite playmate. It doesn't mean they don't get on with other people, but they generally find one that they really trust, and they begin this kind of communication point that learning about trust, communication, intimacy. So when they become an adolescent, they learn relationships better. They learn how to deal with relationships. They learn how to deal with other people. If they don't have up this trust and ability to communicate and sense of intimacy, intimacy, as I've said before, is more about close relationships and not so much about any sexual behavior at all. So that's important to continue to remember as we talk about some of these relationships early. The play tends to be more meaningful, pleasurable. They're kind of just having there isn't a big deal of controlling. Usually these kind of things, sharing is an important issue. Sometimes that is not something that happens well. And again, depending on, could be birth order issues, could be parenting style issues that lead to lack of sharing. It's not always a trait that the child has. These are always nature nurture in some aspect. Taking turns, that's something that young people need to learn and have some empathy for someone who's not doing something that's really fun when you're doing it. And so taking turns and letting them enjoy that kind of helps when they grow up, to develop a sense of true empathy for other people. Trying new roles. So that's kind of important for them, especially when it gets to gender roles. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It's very much okay for a young boy to be a primary caregiver of a doll or something like that in the play environment. It generally will lead to someone who can understand being a father better, understand being an uncle, understand being an older brother better, rather than just limiting that and saying, oh, boys don't play with dolls kind of thing. And vice versa. So girls, playing with trucks or something like that, or having her brother and sister playing a game with their trucks in the backyard, and they learn the taking turns and those types of things. So anyway, that's play stuff. So these are your functional play. So at the beginning of sensory motor, this is kind of PSY in. Okay. So this is really, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to drive the truck. We're going to have the doll do something. We're going to have the little bear do something. Symbolic play really involves now scripts. We're gonna play school, and I'm gonna be the teacher, and you're gonna be the student, and we're gonna have some lessons. Okay, well this is that I'm gonna drive my truck from here to there. Okay, so functional, which is highly just focused on getting something done. Symbolic is really about script, so that's a good way to kind of remember symbolic scripts, S words. I think that works nicely there. Constructive play, when they start building stuff. This is the blocks. This is Legos. This is the things that are so important that they use their creativity to make things that that may not look like what they're trying to make, but they're using their brains to help develop that skills. And then formal games. Chutes and Ladders was a game we played when I was really young, and certainly played that with my kids as well. But it has rules, and you're forced to go. In order of your turn, and you roll a dice and you go that many. You can't just go what you want to do, and so those are kind of important. That's where those games become really important for young people. These are different types of play. This would be a good chart to have out when you're taking your quiz as well. These are we've kind of talked about these a little bit. Let me see. Company play, that's kind of normal. That would be a child that kind of plays with themselves in their unoccupied play. Okay, so they kind of they might be moving or dancing in the room or something like that, but there's really no structure to it, no goal to it. A solitary play is like playing in the room with a bear, and the bear walks up, and those kind of things. And there's onlooker play where they're watching something, and so on and so on. So you can go right through that. But this is a good chart to have out for those kind of things. We'll get to that. So here's some of the other types of play. So this is again part non-social play. These usually occurs more in 2 and 3-year-olds. After that, usually the social aspect it becomes common by age of 5. Girls likely to engage in more social play than boys. Boys can go off and ride their bike. Well, they might be young at 5, but or they go in the backyard and just play with sticks. Some boys like to play with sticks. And it can be social or non-social, but they tend to have less interaction than the girls do. An exception is educational activities, and that's why educational activities become so important, because it's teaching them the social aspects, and their emotional intelligence can grow from that. These are gender differences, and we'll talk about these in a minute. What is or nurture? There certainly are some nature issues in terms of different styles of play that affect different types of plays. There's also some, I would say, Darwinian issues of culturally, where boys and girls have different types of play. There's also observational learning. If the dad and the mom, or the male and the female, if they're not married, take certain roles on. Traditional roles would be the dad is going to go to work and mom has a part-time job, kind of thing. Not such in today's world. Maybe it's a single parent, so the boys and girls get their sole observational learning from mother, or from grandma, or if it's the next generation, maybe from grandma. Grandpa lived with them, and in that way as well. So here's just some issues with that. Boys tend to play in groups, more competitive. If we're going to play football, or we're going to play basketball. Certainly girls get involved in that, especially more today after the Title IX issues are really having some major impact today. But generally more vigorous activities. If you go to a school, elementary school, and just watch, you'll see much more of this for boys and much more girls engaging in arts and crafts and domestic play. Now, that's not to say that some of the young ladies won't be doing some of these kind of things as well. So there's a lot of crossover, especially more now than there was when I was growing up, which was like ages ago, hundreds of years ago. It was much more clear cut. Okay, today it's blended more, and that makes more valuable for society in general. So environmental influences of biological behavior factors. So part of this is could be birth orders, could be how many children in the family. If you're the only boy and there's 4 girls in the family, you may have more. Girl influences in terms of your play structure. Generally, though, boys prefer play that is dominating, aggressive, and rough. Okay, some of that may come from learning. If someone's going to be rough, it generally would be though. What was really cool about my mom is she would get down on the floor with us when we were little, and she would wrestle around with us, which was really a nice thing. So I have memories of that, which are really nice. Boys tend not to respond. Girls will ask something very politely, and the boy will just usually disregard that or whatever. This is an interesting statement they put in here, and I think hopefully this is changing. But boys avoid girls because they see them as inferior. This may be in here because there's a learned perception of this in culture. We don't pay women as much. We don't treat them as serious in their careers many times, although this stuff is dramatically changing, and I hope it continues to change at the same speed, where eventually boys and girls can have the same ideals when they're growing up. But this was kind of an interesting statement, and I saw it in their PowerPoint in the book that they make these kind of things. I think this might be something, hopefully something that's changing pretty dramatically going forward. So pro-social behavior, this is really about empathy. Can you as a person, can your young child as a person, can they look at somebody else that's doing something and feel what that person's feeling, or try to feel what that person's feeling, and care about that person's feelings? Um, Tends to be more with girls than boys. Again, we get into some behavioral issues, but this is something that my personal opinion, spoiler alert, this is what I think is dramatically missed in today's society. We don't look at the other person and say, what are they going through? Maybe they're going through something that's worse than I am, although I think I'm going through things that are pretty bad. We tend to think that we have it worse. Okay, and so that's kind of my personal opinion, and you can disregard that or accept that however you want. But I think empathy is something that's really critical that we teach our uh, uh, people how to do that, whether they're a child or someone in your family. Uh, so this is the PhD in world is operational children tend to be egocentric, which means that everything is about me. Everything I'm in charge. The story's about me. Um, and as we grow, it becomes more and more start developing different perspectives where we start understanding what the other people are going through, even if it's in a simple play situation. Okay, these have major positive influences in pro-social behavior later. There's inductive techniques that goes back to teaching children how to make proper decisions rather than just telling them what's right and wrong and say do this or do that. But we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do, and that's what we're going to do. Okay. So when they make that decision out on their own, they will make the right decision. Aggressive behavior is really when you're intended to hurt somebody. Usually it's about took my toy, those kind of things. It's really not about. They don't really. Is always because they dislike the other person. The other person did this to me. Okay. And that's really where that kind of comes from at this age, the 2 to 6 age. Um, Too much aggressive behavior, and there can be these big problems in the future. It can be bullying. It can be lots and lots of things. It could be relationships. It could be physical abuse in relationships. There's just a lot of things that go on if a child is really aggressive when they're younger. Okay? Um, and so it's kind of again nature nurture, always part of this stuff. Um, so there's these twins have a high rate of criminality. Monozygotic would be identical twins. They have a high rate of concordance, even if they're raised in separate environments. Okay, they will tend to be that way. Now, the environments may lead to how much of that actually comes out as exhibited, but they would tend to have a higher level of criminality between them. Um, and so this is one interesting thought as well, is child may become aggressive when provoked by the society in general. This maybe goes back to, and this is an empathy issue in terms of something like a Black Lives Matter or people of color. When you have people provoking you for no reason, and there certainly are people that do that, I've seen that happen, it may require a lashing out that may seem inappropriate at the time. So, just something to consider in this whole world we're in today, and the sense of empathy in all directions. In all directions, um, it would be real important to have that. But a young child, this may be something that might be, and provoked could even be just by parents and other adults and things like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a color-based issue. Okay. So, aggressive children tend to lack empathy. They'll go hit somebody. They don't really care how that person feels or that it hurt or whatever. They just want that toy back. It doesn't really matter. Usually, it's observational learning that does that. I always think it's quite unusual when a child will get into a fight at school or hit their brother and sister, and the mom or dad hit them. It just doesn't seem to be consistent to me. So the child doesn't understand. The child then thinks that if someone does something you don't want them to do, you hit them. And so the next time that your brother or sister doesn't do something they want them to do, they'll hit them again. And their parent will hit them. And that will go round and round until the child may be too big to do that. But that's something to think about as you're a parent and maybe look back on your childhood. That it just seems to be not consistent in terms of what you want to do. It's kind of the physical punishment is kind of the quick and dirty way of handling something, whereas the inductive reasoning, inductive parenting is much more requires much more energy. And so, since many of us are really exhausted in our days, then maybe it's That's why that comes out more at different times. Here's a Bandura. Most of us have gone through this Bandura thing where young people watch the adult punching the doll, and as soon as the doll's there, and they go out and they start punching the doll. Whereas before, they had played all around the doll and never even saw it or noticed it. Okay, but when they see the adult doing it up here, it's an old video as you see the woman's in a dress. But they see this happening, and then they also know this little guy is just going to nail it, and little girl too as well. She's sitting on the doll, the bubble doll. So here's a Bender thing. I think I just mentioned that. I mentioned a lot of it. Interesting thing: media, feed of violence, and violent video games contribute to aggressive behavior. They don't necessarily lead to violent behavior. Violent behavior is when something is someone wants to severely injure something or property. But aggressive behavior is when we would go up and maybe be real strong with somebody, or push somebody, or you walk into the hallway, you knock some books out of their hands, or something like that, or just be mean to people in a store, bullying. Those are all kind of aggressive behavior things. Or violent is guns. Many times people say, there's a shooting at a school, and they'll say, oh, that person must be watching video games. Certainly, maybe, and that might be very much part of it, especially because of the age. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there might be a correlation and not a causation. Bringing some terms from our past, so there isn't the violence. Videos aren't causing it, but there's a correlation to that. A lot of it goes back to the genetic aspect of it too. If there's a disposition towards violence in the family too. Okay, so here's the different violence leading to violence. These are some of the different aspects of it. And we can go through each one, but we've kind of talked about some of them already. And part of it goes back to watching things, even like cartoons and stuff. And little, I watched cartoons when I was little, and they were like, Popeye was the most violent thing you ever want to see. Roadrunner dropping an anvil on the belly cavity's head, and he just pops up and walks away. It's like, but there's a certain point, about 3 or 4, where children start understanding the difference between cartoons, mostly cartoon violence, and real world violence. So hopefully they've learned that. But anyway, these are some things that happen with that. Personality and emotion development. So these are things that kids learn about. Where they fit in the family. They learn about their gender. They learn about their skills. I'm really good at this. I'm not so good at this. Parents can help by being realistic with the child, and not necessarily always doing the trophy for everybody concept, but really reward someone for skills they show, and things if they really want to learn something they're not real good at, then help them learn it. But give them a sense of relief. When there's a 5'1" high school basketball player who is a pretty good shooter and dribbler and wants to play in the NBA, probably not going to happen. But that doesn't mean that he can't have a great time playing ball later. So you encourage playing basketball, but maybe not the NBA kind of thing. Anyway, that was a silly comment. But so here's a categorical self. It says, how do we start defining ourselves and where we fit in? Certainly our gender is one of it, but I'm tall, I'm short, I'm heavy, I'm not. I have straight hair, curly hair. I live in an X house. I live in an apartment versus a house. Those kind of things all start matching into who we are in terms of our development going forward. So self-esteem is a big part of it. And again, this goes back to the inductive style. This goes back to authoritative style, where children tend to develop a higher self-esteem and have their attachment. So this hurdles as monkeys. They feel better attachment to their parents, a more positive feeling. Doesn't mean their parents certainly can be a good role models for them, but they just have an attachment to them. And we know a lot of young people that we've all met that really could care less about their parents. At least that's what the behavior they exhibit. So this starts happening in preschoolers, okay, 3, 4, 5 age, and The self-regulatory aspect is really it's a physical development of the brain. As the brain starts developing, we start being able to regulate their own behavior until it happens. So we punish young people for not self-regulating, and yet sometimes it's not their issue. But it doesn't mean we don't explain to them and give them the time to develop that. But sometimes it doesn't quite work just because their physical brain isn't there. It's just like frontal lobe with middle school and high school students. So initiative versus guilt. So we're starting to get into Kohlberg now. So fear of violating rules may cause child feel guilty and incur efforts in mastering those skills. This is something that if your child's afraid to make a mistake, they they may not work at new skills. They may be just so comfortable staying what they're doing. I think it's okay to help your children when they make a mistake to see through it and find a way to the other side rather than just criticizing them, especially today with the homeschool environment, with online learning for young people. So often parents who are real busy trying to take care of their own stuff, their child does their homework and doesn't do a great job in it, and they just tell them to go back and do it again rather than helping them get to the right answer, and realizing that a mistake just means you have a chance to learn something better. It's really all it is. This is when we start getting, the monster beneath the bed, things like that. Really, in preschool period is when these things really happen. Middle childhood is when it moves more from the monster under the bed to school is fitting in. This is we start getting Erickson's now as we're identities, where fears of failure, fears of criticism. The child is a pretty good student, and mom and dad are always praising the student, and the child comes home. I remember this is another aside digression, I guess. But when I was a child, I actually got pretty good grades, and it was really important to me. I was a real people pleaser, and I was really trying hard to get my mom and dad's attention by doing really well in school. And I remember walking home from school one day. I was probably in third grade, second grade, and I actually got a B on a paper. This is when they get letter grades for really young kids. I was so embarrassed. I crumpled it up and threw it into the wash. The wash is like a little river flowing, because I didn't want my parents to see that grade. And that was that was younger, and so I really do that. But I had these fears of how would you call it, disappointing my parents of not getting the grade that they felt was good. So this is maybe a little bit older. I'm not sure that was a bit young. I was a little bit young to be able to do that kind of thing and really think it through. But I was afraid of letting my parents down. There's a gender roles a little bit more. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I think there's a big movement. There has been in the last few years of gender roles. And a lot of it's tied with sports. Now that women are becoming so much involved in sports and other roles of leadership, I think that it leads to this idea of gender roles being modified. Will they ever change and flip-flop? Probably not. But I think they're being modified where a young girl should grow up thinking they can do anything, a young boy should grow up thinking they can do anything. This idea of male nurses is kind of a new concept over the last few years. I think it's great because before it was always the woman became a nurse, and if a guy couldn't qualify for medical school, he went into another profession. He didn't even think about going into the medical field. And now I think it's great that we have male nurses as well as, of course, female doctors too, and surgeons and stuff like that. So I think that's the part of crossover that we're starting to see that really helps, and that a lot of that was leadership roles and athletics and stuff as we were growing up through Title IX years ago. So here's the stages. We generally know we label our gender by 2 to 2.5 years old. We kind of play with certain things. We start looking at traditionalized jobs. Usually we have our own gender is in a positive light. So for a boy, we think boys are cool. For a girl, we think girls are cool. I think that's probably not a bad thing as long as we don't push it too far. of course, most of us know there's different anatomy. We should know with this, um, but it also has different hormones, different chemicals running through our bodies. Much of this is through evolution. Okay, so different. There are certain tribes in some areas where the woman is the breadwinner, so to speak. The woman's the warrior. The woman is the one that goes out and captures the meals, and the man is the one who takes care of the home situation. Um, but not normally. Normally, it's the other way around. So males are taught a certain way and genetically have developed a certain way to be able to be the stronger one, be able to be the one who can do those kinds of warriorish kind of things. And so when kids grow up, boys tend to be more rough and tumble, so they can be a good warrior, and girls are more empathy and fear, so they can stay in home camp and take care of the children. As I said, these are hopefully being modified where they're crossing over. But that always takes time, and there's some parents that really don't want that to happen, so they kind of hold that up. So there's evolutionary psychologists. They occur through natural selection. Here's what I just talked about, and so that's I won't repeat all that, but that's kind of what I was talking about. Evolutionary psychologists, and the brain is something that does change, and when we start using a certain part of our brain differently, our brain adapts to it. The synapses or the nerve cells start to reorganize themselves and reconnect. And so these are things that happen as we go along. But basically, the hippocampus is kind of emotions. It's in our primitive brain, and the right hemisphere is the one that deals with more feelings, emotions, and artistic. Okay. Again, there's a lot of research that shows that's not quite true anymore, but it seems to have some sense on it. The right prefrontal cortex, which is kind of the same idea there. And males tend to use both hemispheres. It doesn't make them better or anything, but just means that there is a different way to do it. So they do the brain scans, and they show children pictures of things. They can look and see where the brain fires in different parts of their brain, and that's where they get a lot of that. So the hormones play a big part of it as well. So masculine type playing girls usually from elevated testosterone, and that can be a genetic aspect of it, and different preferences. These are the trucks and dolls aspect, but boys can and should play dolls, and girls can and should play with the trucks. And hopefully that will develop something. I've seen more women truck drivers in the past probably 10 years than were ever that way when I was growing up. It was never, if the woman was in a truck, it was only because she was the spouse of the actual driver. So anyway, that has changed too. So that, and not that truck driving is that big a deal, but it just allows them to cross over. Cognitive theory. So this is some things about where young people can kind of pick up punishments, and sometimes based on just these kind of things right here. Okay, learning masculinity, and femininity by observing and imitating. We've talked about that already a little bit, so we won't go into that. Kohlberg is about moral development, and so a lot of what Kohlberg talked about was we make a lot of decisions based on our gender identity and gender stability. So concept of one gender is unchanging and interesting because in today's world of LGBTQ plus, I think that the generations that are coming up now, this is going to be a different concept. Okay, and then we'll probably redefine what gender is. Certainly when I was growing up, gender is the sex that was on your birth certificate, and that's the way it always was. It may not be that way going forward. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but it certainly seems that there are physical and psychological reasons why people do change genders or prefer to work between the two genders. And I'm not sure that makes them a worse or better person. It just makes it what it is. Okay, so anyway, these things come up. So genders remains the same size. So this was the we used to call it a cross dresser, which was like a RuPaul, if you remember RuPaul. In that it was a man who dressed as a woman and was a kind of a comedian in that. That would have been what this was. But nowadays it's not so much for funny. It really happens in real life, and we'll see how that plays out over the next years. It'll be kind of interesting to watch that. Um, but gender is used as organizing the world. We expect certain things from male or female. You walk up into a grocery store line. If there's a man or woman there, you might respond differently in terms of whether they can check your groceries out as fast as you want, or so on and so forth. So it just allows you to organize your world. And here's the key terms. Okay, so that's really it. If you have issues about understanding some of the stuff I've talked about, I've gone fairly quickly through it. Please, 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 please send me an email, connect with me on Remind, or we can set up a Zoom talk and we can have a conversation about it. Some of the stuff is fairly controversial and changing, and so some of this is a person's opinion, mine. Other things are things that are nailed in research, and we'll say this, and then I'm going to close it, is that when you make statements about something is this way, think about it this: are you doing that because of your opinion, or are you doing that because it's research? And the concept of "I know a guy who," is contrary to that. That is not research. That's just interesting, maybe very true, but it's just anecdotal. There's nothing to say that that's the reality in the big world. Um, so just be careful when you start throwing things around that are facts, and realize that they might just be your opinion, or you may have a sampling of people that are that way, and and that's your world. But that doesn't mean that's the world that the majority of people live in. So anyway, have a good day, and I will talk to you soon.